Have you ever wondered what happens when the past collides with the future, and neither survives the meeting? Out there, among the ruins of forgotten worlds, even time itself learns to fear the human heart. They said the temporal rift was an accident, a storm of light that tore through centuries. But when it closed, a single man remained. Ezekiel Harrow, a cowboy from the age of dust and gunfire, standing beneath 3 alien moons. To the Thur, his world was legend, a violent myth of courage and madness. To him, their world was a miracle that didn't understand survival. He wasn't a hero. He was a killer trying to forget what redemption costs. But when war came for a species that had forgotten how to fight, they turned to the one creature who never stopped fighting, even when he wanted to. Because humanity doesn't conquer, we endure. And sometimes, endurance is the loudest kind of defiance the universe will ever hear. Before we begin, subscribe, like, and tell me from which city or planet you're watching this. This story explores one of humanity's greatest paradoxes: why meaning matters more than survival. The blood on Ezekiel Harrow's hands was still wet when the sky tore open. He stood in the ruins of the old pueblo, 3 bodies cooling in the Arizona dust behind him, his cult peacemakers still smoking in the desert heat. The outlaws had drawn first. They always did. But as Zeke stared at his weathered hands, calloused and shaking, he wondered if it mattered anymore who pulled first, when the result was always the same. He was reaching for the whiskey flask when the air turned heavy, thick as molasses. Green light spiraled down like luminous serpents, soundless and impossible. Zeke's hand went to his holster by pure instinct, but before steel cleared leather, the world dissolved into emerald fire. When consciousness returned, the smell hit him first. No sulfur, no dust. Instead, ozone and something metallic, clean in a way that made his frontier-worn senses recoil. Zeke's eyes snapped open to a sky the color of crushed violets, 3 moons hanging impossibly large on the horizon. The ground beneath him pulsed with a faint lavender glow. Tall figures surrounded him. Tall was inadequate. They towered at least 8 feet, bodies made of something translucent that caught the triple moonlight and refracted it through veins of luminescence running beneath their skin like liquid starlight. No faces, just smooth curves where features should be, and their skin rippled with pulses of amber and blue light. One held what could only be a weapon, a lance that hummed with barely contained energy. Zeke's survival instinct kicked in before thought could catch up. He lunged, twisted the lance from translucent fingers with a move learned in a dozen saloon brawls, and leveled it at the nearest creature. "If anybody wants answers," his voice came out rough as desert stone, "talk slow and use small words." The creatures recoiled. Light pulsed across their bodies in rapid sequences, accompanied by harmonics that hurt to hear, like crystal bells played wrong. One stepped forward, smaller than the others, its luminescent veins running gold where the others showed blue and white. It raised empty hands, and a device on what passed for its wrist projected words into the air between them, shimmering and translating in real time. "Peace. We mean no harm. I am designated Saline of the Thur. You are on our world. We brought you here." Zeke kept the lance steady, though his arms already ached from the weapon's strange weight. His blue eyes, hard as Arizona steel, swept the scene. Floating structures hung in the distance, connected by bridges of pure light. The air tasted thin, and each breath left him slightly dizzy. "Brought me, from where I was." Not a question. "Why?" Another Thur approached, this one with a more angular, crystalline appearance, its body refracting moonlight into fragments, its translator device activated with a sound like breaking glass. "I am Thrax, keeper of records. We sought to understand. Your species. Humans. The concept you call courage. We have lost this quality. Then you picked the wrong man." Zeke lowered the lance, fatigue making the decision for him. I'm no teacher, just a killer trying to run from what I've done. Celine's body flickered with golden pulses, a language Zeke couldn't read but somehow felt was concern. Your physiological readings are anomalous. Bone density 3.4 times our projections. Cardiovascular system operating at stress levels that should cause system failure, yet you function. How? Lady, I don't know what half those words mean. Zeke sat heavily on what looked like stone but felt warm and alive. His head spun, and not just from the thin air. Where I come from, we just call it surviving. Been doing it 47 years now, though can't say they've all been years worth counting. A commotion rippled through the assembled Thur. Another arrived, this one's luminescence running cold silver, its movements precise and controlled. When it spoke through its translator, the tone carried unmistakable authority. I am Kaveth, first voice of the Peace Council. This human should not be here. The temporal retrieval was meant to extract artifacts, not living subjects. This violates Accord 7 of the sapient preservation laws. The coordinates were imprecise. Thorax's crystal body dimmed apologetically. We sought understanding of primitive Earth warfare, historical context for academic study. The retrieval field appears to have locked onto the human instead of his weapons. Kaveth's silver light pulsed sharply. Return it immediately. Him, Celine interjected, her gold growing brighter. Not it. Him. And the temporal bridge has collapsed. 12,000 of your cycles passed on his world in the moment of transfer. His era no longer exists to return him to. The words took a moment to penetrate. When they did, Zeke felt something crack inside his chest. Maria. His wife. Dead 3 years now in his time. The little plot outside Abilene where he'd buried her with his bare hands. All of it dust for millennia. He laughed, a sound harsh and broken. Well, ain't that just perfect? Run from my demons long enough, and they get taken by time instead. His hand instinctively reached for the flask, found it still there, and took a long pull. The Thur recoiled as if he'd drawn a weapon. He consumes toxins, one of them pulsed in distress, voluntarily. It's called whiskey, Zeke said, wiping his mouth. And where I come from, it's called medicine, for things that don't bleed. He stood, swaying slightly. The triple moons blurred together. So I'm stuck here. In a future I got no business being in. With people who glow like fireflies and don't know what courage is. That about sum it up? Essentially accurate, Thorax confirmed, his crystalline body chiming softly. Though I must note, the classification in your species' galactic codex entry describes Earth as a Class 12 death world with 1.2 standard gravities and an atmosphere composition of 21% oxygen, which our records classify as mildly corrosive to most carbon-based life. Your presence here defies safety protocols. Death world. Zeke almost smiled. Yeah, I reckon Arizona earned that name. Celine approached closer, her translator projecting words with what almost sounded like curiosity. Your primitive weapons, the Colt Peacemaker. Records indicate an 87% lethality rate at 20 meters. Yet you carried 2. Why? Zeke's hand went to his holsters, found them mercifully still there, guns intact. Because sometimes one shot ain't enough, and sometimes you need to be sure. His voice went quiet, haunted. And sometimes you shoot the wrong man, and no amount of bullets can take it back. Before anyone could respond, the violet sky erupted with crimson streaks. Alarms howled from the floating cities, a sound that needed no translation. The Thur scattered in controlled panic, their lights flashing in synchronized patterns. Vroth, Kaveth's silver pulsed with something Zeke recognized despite the alien physiology. Fear. They found us again, all citizens to sanctuary structures. Defense protocols are to be activated, though we have none who can operate them. What of Vroth? Zeke asked, but he was already checking his Colts, muscle memory from 100 gunfights taking over. Species designation, Vroth, nomadic conquerors, extreme aggression, extreme hunger. Thrax's voice trembled through his translator. They have attacked 17 times in the last 4 cycles. We have survived through evasion only. We have no warriors. We abandoned such concepts 12 millennia ago when our wars nearly destroyed us. Only 0.03% of our population survived that horror. We swore never again. The sky split open, and things poured through. Zeke's first impression was of armored nightmares, creatures with bone carapaces and serrated mouths, moving in swarms that blotted out the moons. They didn't fly so much as fall with purpose, crashing into the glowing structures with sounds of tearing crystal and screaming metal. "How many can fight?" Zeke heard himself ask. "None," Celine's gold flickered with distress. "We are pacifists by law and by choice. Violence is forbidden. It is extinction." "And what do you call what's happening right now?" "Silence, except for the sounds of invasion." Zeke holstered his Colts and picked up the Thur lance Celine had dropped in her panic. The weapon felt wrong in his hands, too light in some ways, too heavy in others. But he'd learned to shoot with his father's old rifle when it was taller than he was. He'd learned to adapt or die. "Then I guess," he said quietly, watching the Vroth swarm grow closer, "you folks are going to have to learn real quick what courage looks like when your only other choice is extinction." Kaveth's silver light flashed with anger and something else. Desperation. "We cannot. Our entire civilization is built on the rejection of violence. You ask us to become monsters again?" "No." Zeke walked toward the edge of the platform, where the first Vroth were beginning to land, their bone armor scraping against luminescent stone. "I'm asking you to become survivors. There's a difference. Though I'll admit, I'm still trying to learn it myself." He raised the lance, aimed at the nearest Vroth, and pulled what he hoped was a trigger. The weapon kicked with a force that nearly dislocated his shoulder, firing a bolt of purple fire that took the creature in what passed for its chest. It shrieked and fell, tumbling off the platform into the violet darkness below. Zeke turned back to the assembled Thur, his weathered face set in lines carved by desert sun and desert sorrow. "I ain't a good man. I've killed men who didn't deserve it, and I've failed everyone I ever tried to protect. But I know one thing. If you're gonna die anyway, might as well die standing." Celine stepped forward, her body trembling with light pulses that Zeke would later learn meant internal conflict. Her hand, translucent and glowing, reached for a discarded lance on the ground. She touched it and immediately convulsed, light flashing erratically as if her body rejected the very concept. But she didn't let go. "Show me." She pulsed through her translator, gold light steady again. "If we must learn to survive, teach us. But teach us your way, with principle." And in that moment, as the Vroth swarmed closer and the last free Thur stood frozen between pacifism and extinction, Ezekiel Harrow made a choice he couldn't unmake. Not to be a hero. Heroes were for dime novels and lies. But to be something simpler and infinitely harder. A teacher. One last time. For people who deserved better than what he was, but who had no one else. The question was whether an old killer could teach anyone anything worth learning before his past, or this future, caught up with him. The sky burned red with Vroth fire, and somewhere in the distance, a crystal structure collapsed with a sound like 1,000 mirrors breaking. Zeke cocked the lance and moved forward into the darkness, Celine's uncertain steps following behind him, and wondered if redemption was something that could be taught, or only earned in blood. Either way, he was about to find out. 6 months had passed since that first night. 6 months that felt like 6 years to Ezekiel Harrow, and 6 heartbeats to the Thur who measured time in centuries. The training ground was a converted garden platform, floating 2,000 feet above the violet plains. Dawn broke differently here, 3 suns rising in sequence, painting the sky in layers of amber, rose, and gold. Zeke had taught Celine to watch these sunrises in silence, a ritual from his past. Back on Earth, in those brief, peaceful years with Maria, They'd sat on the porch of their small ranch house outside Abilene, watching the sun come up over the prairie while the coffee cooled in tin cups. Maria. Her face was harder to remember now, details worn smooth by time and whiskey. Dark hair, warm laugh. The way she'd looked at him like he was someone worth saving. 3 years she'd been in the ground when Zeke left Arizona. Now, 12,000 years and counting. Celine settled beside him, her translucent form catching the first light and scattering it into a corona of gold. She'd learned to dim her natural luminescence during these moments, her version of respectful silence. After weeks of agonizing practice, she'd finally managed to hold a weapon for more than a few minutes without her body's violent rejection response. Though Zeke had watched her afterward, alone, her form pulsing erratically as she expelled waves of light that he'd learned meant physical illness. "Tell me about her again," Celine's translator whispered. "You're Maria." Zeke pulled the creased photograph from his vest pocket. How it had survived the temporal transfer was anyone's guess. Probably the same reason his Colts still worked, some quirk of the retrieval field that grabbed everything he carried. The image showed a woman with kind eyes and a careful smile, standing beside a younger version of himself, both of them squinting against a sun that had set for the last time millennia ago. "She saw good in me I never earned," he said quietly. "Married a killer and tried to make him a rancher. Almost worked, too, for a while. Then the Grayson brothers came looking. Said I'd shot their cousin in Tombstone 3 years prior. Thing is, I had. Thought he was reaching for a gun. Turned out he was reaching for his daughter's ragdoll, trying to keep her calm during the robbery I was trying to stop." His hand trembled slightly. "They couldn't get to me direct, so they got to her instead. Found her in the barn. By the time I got home, there was nothing left to save, just something to bury." Celine's gold pulsed softly, and Zeke had learned enough of their language to recognize grief, though how she could feel sorrow for a human woman dead since before her ancestors learned to write, he couldn't fathom. "This is why you teach us," she pulsed. "Not to create warriors. To prevent more of this, more Marias." "That's a prettier way of saying it than I would." Zeke tucked the photo away. "But yeah, your people got 12,000 years of peace. That's something. But peace ain't the absence of violence, Celine. It's knowing when violence is the only language left that evil understands, and having the strength to speak it without letting it consume you." "A paradox," came Thrax's chiming voice. The crystalline historian approached with his usual precise movements, his body refracting the dawn into rainbow fragments. "You teach us to embrace what nearly destroyed us, while simultaneously teaching us to fear it. The historical records are unclear on how ancient human societies managed this balance." "Most didn't," Zeke admitted. He stood, joints cracking. The planet's gravity, slightly higher than Earth's, was slowly crushing him. His knees ached constantly now, and his hands had developed arthritis that made drawing his Colts a test of will every time. That's why there's so many ruins back home and so few folks left standing to remember why they were built. "Yet you persist in this instruction," Kaveth's cold voice cut across the platform. The silver-lit counselor approached with 3 guards, their lights pulsing in synchronization, a show of authority. Despite the clear cultural contamination, despite the fact that 60% of our population protests daily against this militarization, despite the wisdom of 12,000 years of peaceful evolution, Zeke met his gaze, or what passed for it in a being with no eyes. "Despite the fact that you've been attacked 19 times in the last 6 months, despite the fact that without training, you'd have lost this city 3 times over, despite the fact that the Vroth just adapt faster every time because they're learning while you're still debating. They learn because you show them tactics worth stealing," Kaveth's silver flared with anger. "Before the human, the Vroth took resources and departed. Now they study, now they coordinate. Now they steal our technology and retrofit it for war. You have not saved us. You have escalated the conflict." The accusation hit harder than Zeke wanted to admit, because it carried truth. The Vroth had adapted. Their last 3 attacks showed clear understanding of Thur defensive formations, flanking maneuvers, even crude attempts at ambush tactics. He'd taught the Thur to fight, and in doing so, he'd taught their enemies too. "So what's your solution?" Zeke asked quietly. "Run until there's nowhere left to run? Hope the Vroth get bored? Hope some other species with less moral qualms shows up to save you?" "We could surrender," Kaveth pulsed, and something in his tone suggested he'd been considering this for a while. "Become a vassal species. Accept servitude in exchange for survival." "You're talking about slavery." Zeke's voice went hard. "Dressing it up in diplomatic words, but that's what it is. I'm talking about the survival of my people without compromising what makes us who we are. Violence destroyed us once. I watched the historical archives. I have seen what we became. Cities burning, children torn apart. We used weapons then too, human. We had our warriors and our codes and our principles. And in the end, only 0.03% of us survived the righteousness of our own cause." Kaveth's silver blazed with barely contained fury. "Your weapon says peacemaker, but you bring only war. You are a poison we should never have allowed into our blood." Before Zeke could respond, Celine stepped between them, her gold flaring bright enough to cast shadows. "Enough. Kaveth, you speak from fear, not wisdom. And you," she turned to Zeke, "you speak from pain, not truth. Both of you carry wounds that cloud judgment." She pulsed a sequence Zeke had learned meant gathering attention, then continued in a voice that carried across the platform. "The human has given us a gift we did not ask for, but desperately need. Not violence itself, but the choice of when to use it. The Vroth give us no choice. They come, they take, they kill. Pacifism against an enemy who respects no peace is not philosophy. It is suicide with better marketing." Thrax's crystalline form chimed with agreement. "I have documented everything, the human's methods, his teachings, even his failures. And I must note, he has created something remarkable. Not soldiers, not killers, but guardians who understand cost." "What cost?" Kaveth challenged. 3 Thur died in the last battle. 3. In 12,000 years of peace, we lost fewer than that annually to all causes combined. Now we lose them in hours. And how many would have died if we'd done nothing? Celine's gold pulsed with barely restrained grief. "My sister was in the sanctuary towers when the Vroth breached them 4 months ago. She believed surrender would spare her. They consumed her anyway, because that is what Vroth do. They do not conquer. They harvest." The platform fell silent, except for the wind that whistled through the floating spires. Zeke walked to the edge, looking out over the alien landscape that would never be home. In the distance, he could see the training formations. 47 Thur practicing maneuvers he'd adapted from cavalry tactics and guerrilla warfare. They moved with an eerie grace, their glowing forms creating patterns of light that, he had to admit, held terrible beauty. "I ain't here to make you into monsters," he said finally. "Truth is, I'm too broken myself to make anything whole. But I can teach you what I learned the hard way. The code." "You mentioned this before," Thrax chimed with curiosity. "This code. You have not yet fully articulated it." Zeke pulled out his Colt, the worn metal catching the triple dawn. "My daddy taught it to me when I was 10. Right before he got killed by the man whose son Daddy had shot in self-defense. It's simple, it's brutal, and it's the only thing that kept me from becoming something worse than what I already am." He held up one finger. "First, never draw your weapon in anger. The moment you fight from rage, you've already lost the part of yourself worth saving." A second finger. "Second, only fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Your life might not mean much, but it means something to someone somewhere. Spend it on something that matters." A third finger. "Third, if you have to die, die like you're standing. Don't run, don't hide, don't beg. Face it like you chose it, because in the end, how you leave is all anyone remembers." He holstered the Colt with a fluid motion that 6 months of arthritis hadn't completely stolen. "That's it. That's the code. Not profound, not pretty. But it's gotten me through 47 years of staying alive when better men didn't. Celine's translator projected the words, then fell silent as she processed. Finally, her gold pulsed with a determination Zeke had learned to respect. Teach us this. Not your tactics, not your strategies. Teach us how to fight without becoming what we fight against. I can try, Zeke said, but I can't promise it'll work. I've been trying to learn that lesson myself for 3 decades, and I still get it wrong more often than right. That night, long after the others had departed, Zeke found himself alone on the platform again, bottle in hand. He'd learned that Thur synthesizers could approximate whiskey if you didn't think too hard about how or why. The taste was wrong, but the burn was right, and the numbness that followed felt familiar enough. The stars here were wrong too. Constellations he'd never seen, forming shapes that meant nothing. No Big Dipper to guide north. No Orion to mark the seasons. Just alien lights in an alien sky, reminding him with every glance that he was further from home than any human in history. You drink alone frequently. Celine's voice was soft, her luminescence dimmed to almost nothing as she approached. Thrax says this is a pattern, self-medication for psychological trauma. Thrax is a busybody who should mind his own crystalline business. But there was no heat in Zeke's words. He offered the bottle. She took it, examined it with curiosity, then tried a sip. Her entire body flashed chaotic colors before she managed to swallow. "This is poison!" she gasped through her translator. "Yep. Why do you consume it?" "Because some nights the faces of everyone I've failed line up so clear I can count them. Tonight I'm up to 47. Might be 48 soon, if I can't teach your people what they need to know without getting them all killed in the process." Celine settled beside him, and in a gesture she'd learned from watching him, awkwardly tried to place what passed for her hand on his shoulder. The touch felt like warm water, slightly electric, completely alien, and somehow comforting anyway. "You saved my life," she pulsed softly. "When the Vroth breached the sanctuary, you didn't know me, had no obligation, but you fought through 12 of them to reach the civilians trapped inside, and when you finally got to us, you were bleeding from 5 wounds, and you were laughing." "That wasn't laughter," Zeke corrected quietly. "That was my body's broken response to pain it shouldn't survive. Endorphins, adrenaline, all the chemistry that keeps a man moving when he should be dead. Probably looks insane to someone who feels pain different than humans do." It looked like joy. Celine's gold pulsed with an emotion Zeke couldn't quite read, like you had found something worth the cost. And I thought, this human who drinks poison and carries weapons and cannot speak our language properly, he understands something we have forgotten. What's that? That life means more when you choose to risk it for something. We Thur live centuries, Ezekiel Harrow, and in all that time most of us never choose anything worth the breath we take. We exist, we endure, but we do not live. She stood, her form catching the moonlight and scattering it across the platform in patterns that might have been Thur script or might have been random beauty. "You are teaching us to live again. Kaveth fears this, but I think he fears it because he recognizes the truth in it." Zeke watched her walk away, her gold fading into the distance. Alone again, he pulled out Maria's photograph, studying it in the alien moonlight. "I hope you'd be proud," he whispered to the image. "I'm trying to save people again, trying to be something more than what killed you. But I'm scared, Maria. I'm scared I'm just teaching them how to die the way I'm dying. Slow and mean and full of regrets." The photograph offered no answer. It never did. In the distance, alarms began to wail. The Vroth were returning, right on schedule. This time, 47 Thur Guardians rose to meet them, their lights forming defensive patterns against the dark, and somewhere in that formation, Celine burned gold and bright, a weapon in her hands that 6 months ago she couldn't touch, fighting for a future she couldn't see but had chosen to believe in anyway. Zeke holstered his flask, checked his Colts, and moved to join them, Because if there was one thing 12,000 years and 6 months had taught him, it was this. The fight was never really over. You just chose whether to face it standing or on your knees, and Ezekiel Harrow had never been much good at kneeling. The first real test came on a morning that started like any other, which was to say it started wrong. 14 months after his arrival, Zeke's body had aged in ways that would have taken 5 years Earthside. The gravity wore on him constantly. His knees cracked like gunshots when he stood. His hands shook unless he concentrated, making the simple act of loading his Colts a deliberate exercise in denial. The Thur food made him sick more often than not, leaving him gaunt and hollow-eyed. But he'd survived worse. He'd survived Maria's death. He'd survived the war before that. He could survive this too. He had to, because 73 Thur had learned to stand, and they needed someone to show them how to keep standing when everything went to hell. The attack came at dawn, as they always did now. But this time, the Vroth didn't just swarm. They coordinated. 3 assault groups, each targeting a different section of the city's perimeter, forcing the defenders to split their already meager numbers. "They're learning faster," Celine pulsed beside him, her gold flickering with combat readiness he'd taught her. Over 14 months, she'd transformed from a scientist who couldn't touch weapons to something else entirely. Not a soldier. Something more dangerous. A guardian who understood cost. "They are," Zeke agreed, checking the plasma lance he'd modified to fit his grip. His Colts hung at his hips, but ammunition was finite. He'd fired exactly 47 rounds in the last year, keeping careful count. 17 bullets left in the world, and then he'd be just another relic of a dead age. Time to see if what we've taught holds when the pressure's on. The Vroth hit the eastern platform first, a tide of bone and teeth that crashed against hastily erected barriers. But this time, the Thur didn't just activate shields and retreat. They held formation, just as Zeke had drilled into them. Overlapping fields of fire. Mutual support. No one alone. No one abandoned. And it worked. The first wave broke against disciplined plasma fire, Vroth bodies tumbling into the violet depths below. A cheer went up from the defenders, their lights pulsing with something Zeke recognized as dangerous as any Vroth charge. Overconfidence. "Stay sharp," he barked into the command channel. "That was just them testing us. Real fight's about to start." He was right. The second wave came with captured Thur technology, shield generators cobbled together from scavenged parts. Suddenly, the Vroth were harder to kill, their natural armor supplemented by stolen innovation. The eastern platform began to buckle under sustained assault. "Western Quadrant reports breach," Thrax's crystalline voice crackled through the communication net. "Vroth infiltrators bypassed the outer perimeter. They're in the civilian sectors." Zeke's blood went cold. This was new. This was adaptation. The Vroth weren't just attacking, they were executing strategy. "Celine, you have Eastern Command. Hold that line no matter what." "Where are you going?" Her gold flashed with concern. "Where I'm needed." He was already moving, his aging body protesting every step as he ran toward the western platforms. Behind him, he heard Celine's voice pulse in the Thur battle cant he'd helped develop, a fusion of their harmonic language and his cavalry commands. "Steady, hold fast. Remember the code. First principle, never from anger. We fight because they cannot. We stand because falling is not an option." The western platform was chaos. Civilians ran in every direction, their lights flickering in panic. Vroth moved between them like sharks through water, bone claws tearing through translucent flesh. Zeke saw a young Thur, couldn't have been more than 20 cycles old by their standards, barely an adolescent, trying to shield what looked like their parent with their own body. The Vroth raised a serrated appendage. Zeke's Colt cleared leather before conscious thought engaged. The shot echoed across the platform, wrong sound in a wrong world, and the Vroth's head exploded in a spray of dark ichor. 16 bullets left. "To me," Zeke's voice cut through the panic. "Civilians behind me. Form up. You've trained for this. and miracle of miracles, they did. 5 Thor Guardians, ones he trained personally, materialized from the chaos and established a defensive perimeter. Their movements weren't perfect. One held their lance wrong, compensating for an injury. Another was visibly shaking, their light stuttering with fear. But they stood. The Vroth came at them in a rush, 12 strong, betting their mass would overwhelm the small group. Zeke had maybe 3 seconds to decide. Play it safe, hold position, protect the civilians, and hope reinforcements arrived in time. Or do the stupid thing, the human thing. Cover the civilians, he said quietly. Then he charged. Later, Thrax would describe it in his records as tactically insane and physiologically impossible. A human, aged and injured, moving at speeds that should have torn his joints apart, engaging 12 Vroth in close combat with a plasma lance and 2 bullets he refused to waste. The old historian's analysis would note that Zeke's biometric readings during the fight showed adrenaline levels 847% above human baseline, heart rate sustained at 180 beats per minute, and damage accumulation that should have resulted in system failure. But in the moment, Zeke wasn't thinking about biology or statistics. He was thinking about a young Thor trying to shield their parent. He was thinking about Maria, dying alone while he was too far away to save her. He was thinking about the code, about dying standing, because kneeling had never been an option anyway. The lance burned in his hands, plasma cutting through Vroth armor like heated wire through snow. But there were too many, and they were adapting in real time, learning his patterns, countering his moves. A claw caught his shoulder, tearing through the leather duster and the flesh beneath. Another hit his ribs, cracking something that made breathing a conscious effort. And Ezekiel Harrow laughed because pain meant he was still alive, and alive meant he could still fight. A Vroth lunged for his throat. Zeke dropped the lance, drew both Colts, and fired point blank. The creature's skull vanished in twin explosions of gore. 14 bullets left. He'd save them. But not today. The remaining Vroth hesitated, just for a moment, faced with a human who should be dead but kept moving. That moment was enough. The 5 Thor Guardians struck from behind, coordinated fire taking down 3 more Vroth before they could react. The rest fled. Zeke collapsed to his knees, tasting copper in his mouth, his vision tunneling. Strong hands, translucent and glowing, caught him before he hit the ground. Celine. When had she arrived? You were supposed to hold the eastern platform, he managed through gritted teeth. I delegated. Her gold pulsed with fury and relief, and something else he was starting to recognize. Something that scared him more than any Vroth. You trained them well, they held, but I could not let you die alone. Ain't dead yet, Zeke coughed, tasting blood. Though I'm working on it. The battle was over. The Vroth were retreating across all fronts. And for the first time in the recorded history of Thor-Vroth conflicts, the defenders had achieved what Zeke's tactical assessment would later classify as a decisive victory. 0 civilian casualties, 3 Thor Guardians injured, 27 Vroth killed, 89 more driven off. The numbers would be entered into Thor databases with clinical precision. But Zeke, as medics worked on his wounds with technology he couldn't begin to understand, was counting different numbers. The young Thor who had tried to shield their parent was safe. The 5 Guardians who had stood with him were alive. Celine's light still burned gold and fierce. He'd saved them this time. That had to count for something. The celebration was muted, as Thor celebrations tended to be. Patterns of light instead of shouts. Harmonic sequences instead of songs. But there was joy in it, and relief, and something new. Pride. Not in killing, but in having protected what mattered. Kaveth approached, his silver light dim but not hostile. You were right, he pulsed quietly, and I was wrong. The Vroth would have taken everything if we had not stood, but 3 of ours are injured. 1 may not survive the night. This is the cost you spoke of. It is, Zeke agreed. He was bandaged and sedated and still in pain that made thinking difficult. And it's a cost that'll keep coming due every time they attack. I ain't gonna lie to you and say it gets easier. Does it get bearable? Sometimes, on the good days, when you remember why you're paying it. Kaveth's silver pulsed with something that might have been acceptance. The council will vote tomorrow on whether to formalize your teachings into our culture, to make the Code of Harrow official doctrine. That's a mistake, Zeke said flatly. I'm just one man making it up as I go. You codify what I'm doing, you freeze it in place. What works today might not work tomorrow. The Vroth are adapting. We have to adapt faster. Then what do you suggest? Teach them to think, not to follow orders, not to memorize tactics. Teach them to improvise, to survive, to make the hard choices when no one's there to tell them what's right. He met Kaveth's non-existent gaze. Because one day, probably sooner than later, I'm not going to be here, and they need to be able to stand without me. That night, after the medics had done what they could and the platform had quieted, Celine found Zeke standing at the edge of the city, looking out at the violet plains below. 3 moons hung in perfect alignment, a sight that happened only once per cycle, painting the landscape in shades of silver and blue. You should be resting, she pulsed softly. Should be dead, Zeke corrected. Resting seems like a waste of time in comparison. He turned to her, studying her form in the moonlight. You held the eastern platform, commanded the defense, made tactical decisions without me there to second-guess you. That's what today was really about. I was terrified, Celine admitted. Every moment, every choice, wondering if I was sending guardians to their deaths, if I was making the right calls. How do you bear it? You don't. You just carry it. Add it to all the other weights until your shoulders get strong enough or you break. He looked down at his bandaged hands. I broke a long time ago. I'm just too stubborn to stop moving. Celine stepped closer, her luminescence washing over him in waves of gold. In the 14 months since that first night, Zeke had learned enough of Thuar physiology and culture to recognize what that particular shade and intensity meant. It was how they expressed affection, bonding, love, though the Thuar concept was different from human understanding. It meant choosing to synchronize your light to another's, to become part of their pattern. And Celine's gold had been synchronizing to his presence for months now, whether she consciously realized it or not. I need to tell you something, she pulsed, her translator voice quieter than usual. In my culture, when we find someone who completes our light pattern, we perform a ritual called the joining. It's rare. Most Thuar never experience it. But I feel it. When you are near, my light steadies. When you are in danger, it becomes chaotic. This means something. Zeke felt something crack inside his chest, a different kind of pain than the physical wounds. Celine, I don't know how to explain this gentle, so I'm just going to say it straight. I'm dying. This planet's gravity is crushing me. The air's too thin. The food's wrong. I've aged 5 years and 14 months. Another year, maybe 2 if I'm lucky, and I'll be too broken to fight. 3 years, and I'll be dead. Her gold flickered with distress. The medical scanners confirmed this. But our technology can't fix what's wrong with me. Your doctors said it themselves. I'm built for a different world. Staying here is like asking a fish to breathe air. It works for a while, but the ending's inevitable. Then why do you continue? Because the ending was always inevitable. Just figured I'd make it mean something this time. He reached out, his calloused hand passing through her translucent form, the sensation like touching warm water. I can't give you what you're offering, Celine. I don't know how. I'm broken in ways that ain't just physical, but I can give you this. I can teach you everything I know. I can make sure when I'm gone, you and your people know how to stand without me. Celine's light pulsed in patterns Zeke had never seen before, complex and layered and so full of emotion it made his chest ache. Finally, she spoke again. Then teach me. Not just tactics, not just the code. Teach me how to carry this weight when you are gone. Because I will have to. And I do not know if I am strong enough. You're stronger than you know, Zeke said softly. You just haven't had reason to find out how strong, but you will, and when you do, you're gonna scare the hell out of anyone who underestimates you. Above them, something moved in the darkness between the moons. Vroth scouts, already planning the next attack. But for this moment, under alien stars, with an alien woman who loved him in ways he couldn't fully understand or return, Ezekiel Harrow chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, some fights were worth the cost. Even the ones you knew you'd lose eventually. Even the ones where victory just meant buying someone else time to find a better ending than yours. Same time tomorrow? He asked, referring to their dawn ritual. Always, Celine pulsed, her gold steady now. Until the end. Until the end, Zeke echoed, and wondered which of them was promising to stay and which was promising to remember. 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days after the sky tore open and took him from everything he knew, Ezekiel Harrow prepared to die properly. The Vroth were coming, not a raiding party, not a scouting force. Everything. Intercepted transmissions, translated by Thrax's exhaustive analysis, made it clear. The Vroth migration fleet had voted, in whatever way their species made collective decisions, that the Thur resistance had become too costly. Either the Thur would be completely subjugated or completely annihilated. There would be no middle ground. 12,000 Vroth warriors, descending on a city defended by 143 Thur guardians and 1 dying human. The math wasn't good. Zeke sat alone in his quarters, such as they were. A converted storage platform with a sleeping pad and a small collection of things that mattered. His Colts, cleaned and oiled with religious precision. 6 bullets left in the world. Maria's photograph, so worn now, the image was barely visible. A crystal Celine had given him 6 months ago, one that pulsed with soft golden light when he held it, maintaining some connection to her life force even when they were apart. And a bottle. Always a bottle. He was 50 years old by Earth's counting, though his body felt 70. The gravity had compressed his spine, stealing 2 inches of height. His hands shook constantly now unless he concentrated. His breathing came hard even at rest. The Thor doctors had given him 6 months, maybe 8. The Vroth were going to beat that timeline by a considerable margin. There was a kind of mercy in that. He'd rather die in fire than waste away in a bed, surrounded by beings who meant well, but couldn't understand the particular loneliness of being the last of your kind in a universe that had moved on without you. A soft pulse of light announced Celine's arrival. She'd stopped asking permission to enter months ago, around the time Zeke had stopped pretending he wanted her to leave. The Council has approved the final defense plan, she pulsed, settling beside him. Her gold was dimmer than usual, flickering with an exhaustion that went deeper than physical. Kaveth argued against it for 7 hours. He believes we should evacuate, scatter into the outer colonies, preserve what we can. He's not wrong, Zeke admitted. Strategically, it makes sense. Trade space for time, regroup, live to fight another day. But you disagreed with him. I did. Because running now means running forever. The Vroth won't stop. They'll hunt every colony, every refugee, until there's nothing left. At least here, now, you've got a chance to hurt them, bad enough they think twice about chasing. Celine's light pulsed with something complicated. You sound like you will not be there to see it. I won't, Zeke said simply. He'd never lied to her, wasn't about to start now. The plan we came up with, the one the Council approved, it requires someone to pilot the mining platform into the center of their fleet. Someone to hold it steady while the reactor goes critical. That someone's gonna be me. Her gold flared bright, almost white with distress. No, there are other ways. Remote piloting, automated systems. We tried those. Vroth jamming technology is too good. Needs a biological pilot making real-time adjustments. Needs someone who can think like a fighter, not a computer. And it needs someone who... He stopped, the words catching. Someone who is dying anyway, Celine finished, her translator voice breaking slightly. Someone who has nothing left to lose. That's not... Zeke started to protest, but she cut him off with a pulse of light so intense it hurt to look at. Do not lie to me. Not now. Not about this. Her translucent form trembled, gold flickering chaotically. You came here broken. I thought I could help you heal. But you were never here to heal, Ezekiel. You were here to finish what you started when Maria died. You have been dying deliberately, slowly, calling it sacrifice when it is really just elaborate suicide. The words hit harder than any Vrothclaw. Zeke stared at her, seeing himself reflected in the alien form he'd come to care about more than he wanted to admit. Maybe, he said quietly. Maybe you're right. But does it matter? The job needs doing. I'm the best option to do it. Everything else is just noise. It matters to me, Celine pulsed, her gold steadying with obvious effort. I have synchronized my light to yours. In my culture, this is not casual. It is everything. And now you ask me to watch you deliberately extinguish while pretending it is heroism and not abandonment. I never asked you to. I know. That is what makes it worse. You never asked for anything. You just gave and taught us to stand and never once considered that maybe some of us wanted you to stay. Not for what you could teach, just for you. Silence fell between them, heavy with things neither could fully articulate across the gulf of species and culture and time. Finally, Zeke reached into his vest and pulled out something he'd been carrying for 6 months, a tarnished silver star, a deputy sheriff's badge from Abilene, Kansas, pinned to him by a marshal who'd believed he could be more than a killer. He'd worn it for 3 months before Maria died, before he'd taken it off and never put it back on, carrying it instead like a reminder of everything he'd failed to become. Where I come from, he said softly. When a lawman retires, he passes his badge to someone he trusts to carry on. Someone who'll do the job right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. He held it out to her. I ain't got much to leave behind, but I'd be honored if you'd carry this. Remind your people what they're fighting for when I'm not here to remind them myself. Celine's gold pulsed in patterns Zeke had learned meant crying, though the Thur didn't have tears. Slowly, reverently, she took the badge. Her translucent fingers passed through the metal, but somehow she held it anyway, light bending around it in ways that defied physics. I will carry it, she pulsed. But I will not watch you die alone. The plan requires a biological pilot. It does not specify how many. Celine, no. You taught me the code, Ezekiel. Third principle. If you have to die, die standing. Well, I choose to stand beside you. And you cannot stop me because you are not my commander. You are my... She paused, her translator struggling with a Thur concept that had no human equivalent. You are my light companion, and I will not let you go into darkness alone. Zeke wanted to argue, wanted to order her to stay, wanted to find the words that would make her see sense. But looking at her gold, steady now with absolute determination, he recognized something he'd seen in a mirror long ago, before the years and the whiskey and the guilt had worn it away. Someone who had found a reason to die that felt like living. All right, he said quietly. All right. Then we do this together. But we do it my way. We make every second count. We hurt them so bad they tell stories about this day for generations. Tell me what you need. I need you to help me up. Then I need you to help me get to that jury-rigged mechanical horse the engineers built. And then I need you to help me show these bastards what happens when you back a couple of stubborn fools into a corner and forget that stubborn fools are dangerous precisely because they're too dumb to know when to quit. The defense of the Thor homeworld would later be recorded in 17 different databases, each cataloging different aspects. Thrax's historical account would focus on tactics. Kaveth's reluctant report would emphasize the cultural cost. The Galactic Council's investigation would note it as a violation of 37 different warfare protocols. But the truth, the part that mattered, was simpler and messier and more human than any of them could capture. When the Vroth fleet entered atmosphere, They found not panicked civilians fleeing, but a defensive network that had learned from 27 months of constant warfare. Every approach vector was covered, every weakness protected. Every Guardian knew their role and, more importantly, knew why they were willing to die for it. The battle was chaos, always was. The Vroth came like a living tsunami, crashing against energy barriers and plasma fire with the kind of relentless pressure that had conquered 17 other worlds. They were not stupid. They were not cruel for cruelty's sake. They were just hungry and desperate and operating from a philosophy that said survival justified any action. And for the first 4 hours, they were winning. Then Zeke and Celine launched the mining platform they'd modified over 6 months of secret work. The Thor engineers had thought he was insane, trying to retrofit a civilian vehicle into something combat-capable. They'd been right. But insanity, Zeke had learned, was sometimes just vision that hadn't been vindicated yet. The platform was styled after a horse, or at least Zeke's drunken description of one. Mechanical, yes, but with lines that echoed the Mustangs he'd chased across Arizona plains a lifetime ago. It shouldn't have been able to fly, but Thor gravity manipulation made possible things that would have been magic back home. Mounted on top, weapons that looked like his old Colts but fired plasma with enough intensity to punch through Vroth armor at 200 meters. And hanging from the frame where spurs would be, small pieces of metal that rang when the platform moved, a sound like bells or distant thunder, pure nostalgia that served no tactical purpose except to remind one old man of everything he was fighting for. They rode into the center of the Vroth fleet like cavalry charging artillery, because sometimes the only way through hell was straight ahead and screaming. Zeke piloted with hands that shook until they gripped the controls, muscle memory from 1,000 gunfights overriding deteriorating nerves. Celine coordinated targeting, her processing speed and his combat intuition merging into something neither could have achieved alone. They were outmatched, outnumbered, outgunned by any rational calculation. But rationality had never been humanity's strong suit. 3 minutes to reactor critical, Celine pulsed. Vroth command ship is adjusting position. They know what we are attempting. Then we adjust faster. Zeke jerked the controls, the mining platform spinning in ways it was never designed for, dodging plasma fire that turned space around them into a light show of death. One blast clipped their flank, alarms screaming as systems failed. The platform lurched, losing altitude. We are hit, power at 40%. We will not reach the center of their formation. Yeah, we will. Zeke's hand moved to the override, the one he'd installed without telling anyone. The one that rerouted auxiliary power from life support to engines. The one that would buy them 90 seconds at the cost of making the cockpit vacuum in 2 minutes. Ezekiel, no, Celine, look at me. He turned in his seat, meeting her non-existent gaze with eyes that had seen too much and not nearly enough. I told you once I couldn't give you what you were offering. I was wrong. I gave you everything I had. Every morning watching sunrise. Every lesson about standing. Every moment I stayed when running would have been easier. That was me loving you the only way I knew how. And I need you to know, before this ends, it was enough. You were enough. Celine's gold blazed with intensity he'd never seen before, so bright it washed out the violet sky. Her translucent form shifted, moving to wrap around him, and for a moment they existed in the same space, human and Thor, physical form and light energy, merged in a way that shouldn't have been possible but was. And Ezekiel Harrow, who hadn't cried since the day he buried Maria, felt something warm on his face and realized it was tears, because sometimes the heart learned to feel again precisely when it was too late to matter. I love you too, Celine pulsed, the first time she'd used the human term. Not in ways you understand, not in ways I understand. But if this is ending, then I choose to end it standing beside you. Third principle, always. Zeke hit the override. The platform surged forward, momentum carrying them into the heart of the Vroth fleet. Around them, 12,000 Vroth warriors converged, but they were too late. The reactor hit critical mass, and Zeke, with the last of his strength, pulled both Colts from their holsters. 6 bullets left in the world. He'd saved them for something important. "For everyone I couldn't save," he whispered, and fired. The shots were symbolic more than tactical, plasma from the platform's weapons doing the real damage. But in his mind, those 6 bullets hit everything that mattered. Maria, the 3 men he'd killed by mistake, the deputy marshal who'd believed in him, the version of himself he'd tried to become and failed, Celine, the Thor. Everyone who'd ever tried to stand against darkness and found the standing was harder than the falling. The explosion, when it came, registered on sensors 3 systems away. A mining platform reactor going critical in optimal conditions will produce a blast radius of approximately half a kilometer. In the center of a Vroth fleet, with 12,000 bodies packed in formation, the blast propagated through ship after ship, reactor after reactor, creating a cascade failure that lit up the violet sky like a second sun. From the ground, Kaveth watched it happen, his silver pulsing with emotions he didn't have names for: grief, pride, horror, vindication, all of them at once. Thrax recorded every detail with crystalline precision, his historian's mind already composing the words that would turn this moment into legend. And across the defensive line, 143 Thur Guardians stood and watched their teacher die exactly as he'd taught them to live. Standing. The Vroth fleet scattered, not retreated, scattered, broken. The survivors fled in 17 different directions, their command structure shattered, their momentum turned to rout. They would not return, not to this world. The price had been made clear in ways their pragmatic philosophy understood. This species that had learned to fight would cost more than any conquest was worth. The Thur had won. The price was 847 Guardians dead over 27 months of warfare. 3 city platforms destroyed, civilian casualties numbering in the thousands from collateral damage and Vroth raids. And 1 human, gone in a flash of light so bright it seared itself into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. They found his hat 3 days later, floating in the upper atmosphere, held aloft by thermal currents and luck. The leather was scorched, the brim torn, but the shape was unmistakable. They never found the bodies. But in the wreckage of the mining platform, fused into metal by heat that should have destroyed everything, they found 2 things. A tarnished silver star, badge of a deputy sheriff from a town that hadn't existed for 12,000 years, and wrapped around it, held by hands of pure light frozen in time, a golden luminescence that pulsed 3 times before fading. 3 pulses. In Thor language, the code that meant I love you, I see you, I remember you. The message was clear enough that no translation was needed. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, 2 warriors had found each other, learned from each other, and in the end, chosen to face the dark together rather than let the other go alone. That was the real victory. Not the dead Vroth, or the saved city, or the broken fleet. Just 2 people who learned what it meant to stand and stood together and made it mean everything. The morning after the battle, Kaveth stood on the eastern platform where it had all begun, staring at the hat. They'd placed it in a stasis field, preserving it exactly as found. Scorched, torn, impossibly still holding shape after an explosion that had vaporized everything else within 2 kilometers. The Thur scientists had theories about quantum entanglement and energy field interference, but Kaveth suspected the real reason was simpler and stranger. Some things refused to die, just because they should. Thrax approached, his crystalline body catching the dawn light. The council has called session. They want to discuss memorialization, codification of his teachings, the formal establishment of the Harrow protocols. Of course they do. Kaveth's silver pulsed dimly. Now that he is gone and cannot argue against turning his improvised desperation into holy writ. He paused, light flickering with an emotion he rarely showed. I was wrong about him. You were afraid, Thrax corrected gently. Fear is not wrongness. It is just incomplete information. I told him he was poison. That he would destroy what made us who we are. Kaveth's light steadied with something like resolve. But he did not make us into monsters. He gave us the choice to become something we had forgotten we could be. Guardians, protectors, people who could stand between the darkness and those too vulnerable to stand for themselves. He gave us more than that. Thrax chimed softly. He gave us Selene. Did you see the recordings from the final approach? Her light patterns in the moments before the explosion? Kaveth had seen them. Everyone had seen them. The way her gold had wrapped around the human's frail form, merging with him in a way that shouldn't have been biologically possible. The Thur joining ritual, performed not with another Thur but with an alien from a dead world, completing a pattern that spanned species and time and philosophy itself. She loved him, Kaveth pulsed quietly. Truly. Not as study, not as curiosity. She synchronized her light to his, knowing he would extinguish, knowing she would extinguish with him. That is not something we have seen in 12,000 years of peace. Which means perhaps we were not peaceful, Thrax observed. Perhaps we were just empty, and it took a broken human to show us the difference. The council session was tense. 40% of the population still opposed everything Zeke had represented, though their arguments had lost considerable force when the alternative turned out to be extinction. The debate centered on a simple question. What do you do with a legacy that saved you but contradicts everything you believed about yourselves? In the end, they compromised. The Code of Harrow would be taught, but not mandated. The Guardian Force would continue, but remain voluntary. Pacifism would remain the ideal, but defense would no longer be called violence when it protected those who could not protect themselves. It satisfied no one completely, which meant it was probably the right answer. But the real surprise came 3 months after the battle, when Kaveth himself requested to join the Guardian training program. At his age, by Thur standards barely past middle life cycle, the physical requirements would be challenging. But he stood before the training platform, silver light steady, and repeated words that had become ritual. Never draw from anger. Fight only for those who cannot. Die standing if you must die at all. Behind him, 17 other Thur joined, their lights a spectrum of colors, all of them speaking the words together. The code, not perfect, not sufficient, but theirs now, earned in blood and light, and the memory of 2 warriors who had taught them what standing meant. Thrax recorded it all, as was his purpose, but he also added a footnote that would survive in archives for millennia. Today we learned that philosophy without the will to defend it is just words waiting to be forgotten. The human understood this, Selene understood this, and in understanding, they gave us permission to be complicated, to be both peaceful and prepared, to be guardians of what we love rather than just witnesses to its loss. Years passed. The Thur expanded, carefully, deliberately, always remembering the cost of confidence. They encountered the Vroth again, twice, in the outer colonies. Both times the Guardian Corps deployed, and both times the Vroth withdrew after minimal engagement. The reputation of the species that had learned to fight had spread, but more than that, something else had changed. The Thur began reaching out to other species, not with the detached curiosity of superior beings studying primitives, but with genuine interest in learning. They sent ambassadors to worlds they'd previously avoided. They opened their cities to refugees from conflicts they could not prevent. They became, slowly and imperfectly, the thing Zeke had tried to teach them. People who stood not because they were strongest, but because someone had to. 4,000 years after the battle, a Thur archaeological expedition on Earth, now long abandoned and returned to wilderness, found something remarkable in the ruins of what had once been Abilene, Kansas. A gravestone, weathered but legible, marking the burial site of someone named Maria Elena Harrow, beloved wife, taken too soon. They brought the stone back, placed it beside the memorial they'd built for Zeke, a towering structure that showed him as he'd been in his prime, hand raised toward the horizon, eyes fixed on something distant and important. The code inscribed in light at the base, and beside it now, a smaller marker for Maria. Because the Thor historians had finally understood, you cannot know the warrior without knowing what he fought for. And Ezekiel Harrow had fought for her, always, even after she was gone. Every guardian he trained, every Thor he saved, every moment he chose to stand rather than fall. All of it was him trying to protect someone he'd failed to protect once, trying to save everyone because he couldn't save the one who mattered most. The memorial became a pilgrimage site. Young Thor, entering Guardian training, would visit and touch the base of the statue, feeling the energy fields hum beneath their hands. They would read the words, "Never from anger, only for those who cannot." Standing, always standing, and sometimes, on nights when 3 moons aligned just right, security recordings would capture something impossible. A figure, human-shaped, walking the perimeter of the memorial, moving with a slight limp as if one knee bothered it, sometimes accompanied by a glow of gold that shouldn't exist but did anyway. The scientists called it quantum echo or energy imprint or any of a dozen other terms that meant they didn't really understand. The Guardians called it something simpler. Watching over us, they would say, the way he always did. 6,000 years after the battle, the Galactic Council formally recognized the Thor Guardian protocols, though they diplomatically renamed them the Defensive Ethics Framework to avoid honoring a species that had violated so many established norms. It didn't matter. Everyone knew where the ideas came from. Everyone knew whose legacy they represented. And when a young species called humanity, descendants of the survivors who'd remained on Earth and slowly rebuilt, finally achieved faster-than-light travel and arrived at the galactic community with typical human mixture of hope and aggression and terrible impulse control, it was the Thor who sponsored them. "We know humans," Kaveth's great-great-great-grandchild told the council, her silver light steady with conviction. "We were taught by one, and we owe a debt that time cannot diminish." The humans, young and scared, and in way over their heads in a galaxy full of species with millions of years of advancement, asked why. Why would you help us? Why would you care about one species among thousands? The Thor ambassador showed them the memorial, the statue, the hat, the silver star, and the golden light. And she told them the story of Ezekiel Harrow and Selene, of 2 warriors who taught a species to stand, of a love that crossed species and time and death itself. "Your people," she pulsed through the translator, "have a saying, do they not? About the stars?" The human ambassador nodded, confused. "We have many. There is one we remember, one that a human transmitted before he died, that our historians recovered from corrupted data files. It said, 'The stars ain't so empty no more.'" The human's eyes widened. "That's from a transmission? From who?" "From Ezekiel Harrow. The last transmission from his mining platform before the reactor went critical. We thought it was random. Dying words without meaning. But after meeting you, after seeing how humans are, we understand now. He was not talking about the stars being empty of life. He was talking about them being empty of meaning, of connection, of the kind of defiant, impossible hope that your species seems to produce even when rationality says you should despair." She gestured to the memorial, to the statue of a weathered man in a scorched coat and a tattered hat, hand raised toward a horizon he never lived to see. "Your ancestor came to us broken and dying and lost, and he taught us that sometimes being broken is just another way of being strong, that standing in the face of impossible odds is not stupidity, but the highest form of wisdom. That love that makes you vulnerable is the only love worth having. These are human lessons, and we will never stop being grateful that one of your people crashed into our world and refused to let us die peacefully when we could live messily instead." The human ambassador stood in silence for a long time, studying the memorial. Finally, she asked, "What happened to him? To both of them, after the explosion?" "Their bodies were never recovered," the Thor replied. "But we believe, based on energy readings and quantum probability, that in the moment of the explosion, when the reactor went critical and their life forces merged through the joining ritual Selene initiated, something unprecedented occurred. Their consciousness patterns may have been preserved in the energy field itself, existing now in a state between matter and light. So they're alive. No, and yes. And something other. We have sightings, always during 3-moon alignment, always near the memorial, always together. Science cannot explain it. Faith says they guard us still. Truth is probably something in between. The human ambassador nodded slowly. Can I ask you something? Do you regret it? Taking him from his time? Bringing him here to die far from home? The Thor considered the question carefully. We regret the method, the accident, the fact that he never had a choice. But regret the outcome? No. He gave us back something we had lost. The ability to care about something more than our own comfort. The courage to risk what we valued to protect what mattered. The understanding that peace is not the absence of capacity for violence, but the choice to pursue it even when you have the strength to take easier paths. She paused, her light pulsing with an emotion humans couldn't quite read but felt anyway. He also gave us Selene. And Selene gave us hope that love could cross any divide if the hearts involved were brave enough to reach. That is not nothing. That is everything. On the platform overlooking the memorial, an old tradition continued. Every dawn, guardians would gather and watch the triple sunrise in silence, a ritual passed down through generations who had never met Ezekiel Harrow, but knew his teaching like a heartbeat. They would stand until the last sun cleared the horizon, then recite the code, then disperse to their duties. But on this particular morning, the 3 moons aligned just right, and the guardians saw something that made even the most skeptical among them believe in the impossible. 2 figures, one human-shaped, weathered and walking with a slight limp. One Thor-shaped, glowing gold, with an intensity that made the dawn look dim. Walking together along the edge of the platform, his hand passing through her luminous form, her light wrapping around his shoulders like an embrace. They walked until they reached the memorial, stood before it for a moment that felt eternal, then turned toward the assembled guardians. The human figure, if it was real and not just light playing tricks, tipped his hat. The Thor figure pulsed 3 times, gold and bright and achingly beautiful. Then they faded, dissolving into the dawn like mist, leaving behind only the faint sound of bells or distant thunder, and the absolute certainty in every guardian's heart that they were not alone. That somewhere between memory and matter, love and light, 2 warriors still stood watch over the people they died to protect. The young guardians asked the old ones, "Is it real? Do they really come back?" And the old ones, who had asked the same question once, gave the only answer that mattered. Does it matter if they're real? The lesson is, the code is, the love is. That's what endures. Everything else is just details. In the archives, Thorax's final entry before his own passing, recorded in crystalline precision and stored in databases that would outlive stars, contained a simple observation. Humanity, as a species, should not work. They are fragile. They are short-lived. They make decisions that defy logic and pursue goals that rational analysis says they cannot achieve. And yet they persist, and yet they inspire. And yet, when given the choice between comfortable death and difficult life, they choose life every single time, no matter how badly the odds are stacked against them. We Thor, who lived for centuries and thought ourselves wise, learned wisdom from a human who barely survived 5 decades. We, who abandoned violence out of fear, learned courage from a man who was terrified every moment but acted anyway. We, who believed love required biological compatibility, learned about connection from 2 beings who should never have understood each other but chose to anyway. This is the human gift to the galaxy. Not violence, not aggression, not even their remarkable physical resilience, but the absolute, irrational, beautiful refusal to give up. To accept that difficulty means impossibility. To believe that one person standing in the dark can make the dark less empty. Ezekiel Harrow was not a great man. He said so himself many times, usually while drinking poison and mourning failures. But he was a good man who tried, despite everything, to leave the universe slightly better than he found it. And in trying, he succeeded beyond anything he could have imagined. "The stars are not empty," he said. "And thanks to him, neither are we." 4,000 years later, on a colony world called New Abilene in honor of the memorial site, Thor children learned the story of the cowboy and the guardian who taught a species to stand. They learned the code. They learned about sacrifice and love and the courage to be vulnerable. They learned that heroes weren't perfect, just persistent. And sometimes in the schoolhouse, a teacher would point to a display case containing artifacts from old Earth. A rusted Colt peacemaker, remarkably preserved by technology that made such preservation possible. And next to it, a holographic display of a transmission, recovered and restored, playing on loop. The voice was rough, tired, belonging to a man who had every reason to give up, but hadn't. And in that voice, crackling across 12,000 years and counting, came words that defined a legacy. "The stars ain't so empty no more. Tell them that. Tell them we stood. Tell them it mattered." And in every classroom, on every colony, in every corner of the civilization that Ezekiel Harrow had helped save, the answer came back, spoken by millions of lights pulsing in unison. We stand. It matters. We remember. Always. Because that's what guardians do. They remember the watch. They honor the fallen. And they teach the next generation that standing, especially when it's hard, especially when it costs everything, is the only way to ensure that no light ever goes out alone. The Code of Harrow wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. It wasn't a solution to every problem the universe could throw at species trying their best to navigate the dark. But it was a start. And sometimes, especially for species just learning to stand, a start is all you need. The rest you figure out as you go, one sunrise at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time, until the stars, vast and ancient and impossible, seem just a little less empty. And the dark, deep and endless and cold seems just a little less lonely, because somewhere in that darkness, on platforms glowing with light and cities floating in violet skies, guardians stand watch, remembering, standing, never alone, never empty, never giving up, just like a cowboy from Arizona taught them, a lifetime and a legend ago. Humanity, fuck yeah. But also, Thor, standing strong. Because the best legacies are the ones we build together, across species and time and every difference that says connection is impossible. The ones we build standing, always standing, until the end. In the end, Ezekiel Harrow's story wasn't about war or aliens or even survival. It was about what happens when one broken soul refuses to stay broken, when courage becomes the act of standing, even when standing hurts. Maybe that's what humanity's real gift to the galaxy was. Not power, not brilliance, but the stubborn will to keep trying, even after every reason says you shouldn't. Because the stars aren't empty anymore. Not since one cowboy from a dying world taught them what it means to stand. What do you think courage really is? Strength, sacrifice, or simply refusing to give up? If you knew your world was gone, would you still fight for one that isn't yours? And when the time comes to choose, would you rather survive quietly or stand loud enough to be remembered? If this story reminded you that some fights are worth standing for, write the word "stand" in the comments, just to show you stayed until the end. Tell me, from which city or which planet are you watching? Subscribe if you believe stories like this remind us what we're still capable of. Like, share, and watch the next tale. Because somewhere out there, someone else is learning to stand too.